This Week in Connecticut with Dennis House starts now.
Good morning, everyone. Here's what's ahead this Sunday, September 8th, 2024. Senator Chris Murphy joins us to talk about help for flood victims, his re-election campaign, and Vice President Kamala Harris. If she is elected president and offers him a cabinet job, will he take it? Also, he's often called the Sign King of Connecticut, and SignPro is one of Southington's most prominent businesses. So why is Pete Rapocchio suing the town? He's here to explain. The blood shortage in Connecticut has reached a critical stage. Today we meet John D. Casanova from the Connecticut Blood Center, who once needed blood to save his life. His remarkable story is on today's agenda as well. And what do you think of these new signs welcoming people to our state? But first, my conversation with the state's junior senator seeking a third term. He's captured the attention of the Democratic nominee, so what could that mean? And joining us now is Senator Murphy. Good to see you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about this summer of the floods in the Naugatuck Valley, and some of those towns were really hard hit. What is the federal government doing to help these folks?
Yeah, this was a 1,000-year flood. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. This is an example of the kind of climate shocks that we're seeing all across the country, from tornadoes to increased strength hurricanes to these epic floods. The federal government has a big role to play here. One, we're going to make sure that towns get reimbursed for the public works that are being done. Some of these communities have to reconstruct bridges overnight. That's a really expensive endeavor. Second, we're going to try to get support to the businesses, mainly in the form of bridge loans to help them get back on their feet. And then probably the biggest and most significant project is individual assistance. Right now, we need every homeowner that has had any damage to their house, your driveway destroyed, your basement flooded, to report that damage to the FEMA website or to your town. We're calculating that damage, and hopefully if we hit the thresholds, we'll be able to get small but meaningful amounts of money to homeowners, those that don't have insurance, to try to compensate them for the damage. I met with the FEMA administrator twice last week, and she's assured me that they're going to do everything in their power to get homeowners assistance if we qualify.
You mentioned these climate shocks, and clearly the climate change that we're going through right now is going to happen again, right? There'll be more floods in these towns. So what's your advice, or what can the federal government do to help these towns prepare for the future?
I mean, I wish it was good enough just to dramatically lower America's carbon emissions. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act that we passed 2 years ago, we're on pace to lower carbon emissions in this country by 40% over the next 2 years compared to 2005 levels. That's great news, but these events are going to continue to happen. So we also need to help these towns invest in protection and remediation. The banks of these rivers are going to need to be fortified. We're going to likely have to put in some new infrastructure along the Connecticut shoreline to try to prevent some of the massive flooding. These are expensive projects, but we've got some initial federal funds set up through programs like the BRIC program, the Building Resilient Communities program, and we're going to try to get as much of that money here to Connecticut.
Let's talk a little bit about the convention just a couple weeks ago, when you were the one Connecticut speaker who got a gig up on the dais there during primetime national television. How does that work exactly? Does the vice president ask you personally, or does the party reach out?
Yeah, I think it was the Harris campaign that reached out and asked me to speak on a topic that I don't think I would have guessed I'd be speaking on if you had asked me a year ago. I spend much of my winter trying to bring Republicans and Democrats together around a bipartisan border security compromise. We achieved that compromise. Unfortunately, Donald Trump killed it, and I was asked to speak at the convention about the difference between Democrats and Republicans when it comes to border security. I think Democrats are sincere about getting a bill done. I think Trump just wants the border to be a mess for political purposes, and I was glad to be able to talk on behalf of the Harris administration about what she'll do to secure the border.
We had an expert on last week who said that Democrats will be better for the economy if Kamala Harris is elected president rather than Donald Trump. What's your take on some of the reasons why you believe, in your judgment, that Vice President Harris would be good for Connecticut if elected president?
Well, I think it's really important that we have a president who cares about making investments in our economy. Donald Trump's philosophy seems to be to just cut taxes for very wealthy people and corporations. That helps a handful of people here in Connecticut, but there's no evidence it trickles down to everybody else. President Harris would make investments in infrastructure. The only way we build Connecticut's economy is to lower the transit time it takes to get from here to Boston or here to New York. President Harris is going to continue to invest in that work. She's going to care about our innovation economy. We've got a lot of high-tech companies, but they need federal grants. They need a partnership with the federal government. Vice President Harris is talking about continuing to build an industrial policy in this country. And then she's going to put tax cuts where they matter most, in the hands of, working class, poor and middle class Americans. That money goes directly into our economy rather than tax cuts just for the wealthy, which tend to kind of get squirreled away in offshore bank accounts and doesn't end up helping the middle of Connecticut's economy.
If she is elected president, and there's talk and speculation, and I know you're aware of it, that there could be a Secretary of State Murphy. If you're offered the job of Secretary of State in a Harris administration, would you take it?
I think you always...
It's hard to turn down.
Yeah, you always listen to a president if they ask you to serve. But I love this job. Obviously, my work between now and the end of October, early November is to get reelected, and I hope the people of Connecticut give me another chance to serve in the Senate. I think I've shown over the last couple of years, between the passage of the bipartisan gun bill and the construction of that bipartisan border bill, that I can be one of the people that helps the Senate work, that brings Republicans and Democrats together. I think I'm getting better at this job, and I'm looking forward to doing it for a third term. But of course, if the President of the United States asks you to serve the country, you're always going to listen.
What is the argument you make when you knock on someone's door, perhaps an undecided voter, and you say, listen, I'd like to be reelected, I'd like your vote, I'd like to ask for your vote. Matthew Corey, the Republican whom you've run against before, is saying it's time for a change. What's your response to that?
Well, again, I'm really proud of the progress we've made. Our streets are safer, our economy is booming. People are moving to Connecticut for the first time in a long time to set up businesses, and I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think that's because of the bills we've passed in Congress. It's because of that Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that I wrote. It's because of the investments in infrastructure and clean energy. So I think there's a direct through line between the priorities that I've had in the Senate and the economic progress we've made, the public safety progress we've made here in Connecticut. And I'm excited to tell that story over the course of the campaign. I also hope that people just see how much I love this job. I mean, I don't take it for granted. Every year I continue to take a week and walk across the state. I'm constantly in every corner of the state. I think it's just a gift, a blessing, that I get to represent Connecticut in the Senate. And I hope that people still see the joy and the enthusiasm that I bring to the job.
I walked with you a little bit a couple years ago, I remember, and we went through downtown Hartford, met some people. But what's the biggest surprise question that perhaps you got, or the statement that you got from someone you met as you did these walks?
I guess what is reinforced to me every year is that the things that are being talked about on the cable news shows at night are not the things that people care about. And so you sometimes expect that you're going to hear the hot political topics when you walk across the state. You never do. Maybe the most surprising thing to me was years ago, during the summer of the Mueller investigation, the investigation into Trump's potential collusion with Russia during the election. It was dominating the headlines. I don't think a single person asked me about it when I was walking across the state. And so it's just a reminder that even the things that are in the Democratic zeitgeist are not the things that normal people are talking about. They're talking about the same things every year. How much are they paying in taxes? How good are the schools? How safe are the streets? And it's a reminder to just keep your head down. This walk is a reminder to me to keep my head down and just work on those issues.
Yeah, one of the biggest issues that viewers will tell me that they complain about is affordability. What can be done if you are reelected next year to try to bring the prices back to normal, or just stop this inflation?
So I'll give you a real specific example. One issue probably that gets raised much more today on the walk than when I started 10 years ago is the price of housing and the price of rent, right? It is out of control.
Especially in our state.
In this country, but specifically in our state. And there's a pretty simple explanation for that: inventory. We just do not have enough supply. And so when you have high demand and low supply, rates and rents go through the roof. We have got to be building more housing in this state. That means we need to have a federal strategy to deliver more direct grants for affordable housing, more tax credits to help build affordable housing. When I say affordable housing, I don't necessarily mean subsidized housing. I just mean houses people can afford, rents people can afford. And then the state's going to have a tough conversation about loosening some of our restrictive zoning laws to make it easier for developers to build. And though that's more a state conversation than a federal conversation, I plan in the next couple of years to be involved in that debate, because it matters when it comes to the affordability of housing in Connecticut.
I want to talk about former President Trump for a moment, because people are saying, his opponents are saying, he's dangerous if he's elected. In your judgment, do you believe that he is a danger to democracy if elected?
Oh, 100%. I think you have to believe him when he tells you that he is going to suspend democracy on day one. You have to just read Project 2025, which is absolutely written by Trump's lieutenants. It is a blueprint for how you turn the Department of Justice into a witch hunt operation to go after Democrats and his political opponents. There's a reason why he has such affection for people like Vladimir Putin. I do think we are at risk of losing our democracy if Donald Trump wins, and I think it's right for Kamala Harris to define and describe those stakes in this election.
And you've worked with JD Vance. He's a fellow senator. Any thoughts on him that you'd like to add?
I'm deeply disappointed in him because years ago he saw who Donald Trump was, right? You've seen the clips. He knew once upon a time that Donald Trump was dangerous, irresponsible, reckless, divisive, kind of the worst of America. And then JD Vance saw the opportunity to benefit personally and politically by attaching himself to Donald Trump, and he did so. I wish he remembered the things that he said when he started out in politics because they're still true today.
Senator Chris Murphy, we thank you for coming in. We'll see you later on this season in a debate.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you.
We will have Murphy's Republican challenger on next week. When we come back, the desperate need for blood donors and a federal lawsuit against a local town.